This episode will essentially cover the first 3 chapters of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. That's Philosopher's Stone, not Sorcerer's Stone, sorry to my American friends. I think that makes sense because yes, 3 chapters is a lot of ground to cover, but I think in the context of an hour-long episode, I think you do have enough time really to make it work. Plus, obviously, as the series gets longer and longer in later seasons, we're going to be probably cramming in like 3, 4, 5 chapters into an episode sometimes. So I think it's a reasonable amount of time to cover for this episode 1. We'd start right at the beginning, just like in the books. We would get our fully fleshed out introduction to the Dursleys before Dumbledore and McGonagall arrive at Privet Drive. Obviously, this was left out in the movies, but I think it's essential to get this character development in early. We'd see Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia starting their day. We'd see little baby Dudley throwing his cereal at the walls in a tantrum, really building up that character development for them. We'd then follow Uncle Vernon on his way to work, noticing all of the things around him, including the cat reading a map, all the people dressed up oddly, and of course the old man bumping into him outside his work and promptly hugging him. I really want to emphasize Vernon's discomfort for anything out of the ordinary, just like again in the books. Think about quick shots of him noticing these things and getting more and more paranoid with everything that he's seeing, hearing things on the news and all of that stuff. Again, just kind of building that understanding of how much he hates anything out of the ordinary. This is especially prevalent later on in the episode when he nearly crashes the car after Harry tells them about the dream that he had about a flying motorcycle. It just really builds again that character development, which I think is going to be so important going on to the future of the series. We then have the jump to that evening with Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall arriving at Privet Drive, and to be honest with you, I think this would go very similar to the movies. I think they did a good job, but I think one thing I would like to see would be that quirkiness to Dumbledore maybe coming out a little bit more. I particularly like the scene with him offering the sherbet lemon to McGonagall and her being disgusted by the thought. I think just something like that, just to build the characters a little bit early on. And of course, Hagrid's entrance is iconic, just like it is in the movie. Again, to be honest with you, I don't think that you need to change anything much with this whole scene. I think basically pretty much reshoot it. Then we have the huge time jump to Dudley's 11th birthday. We'll get to see him with his presents, preparing for his zoo trip, especially the Dursleys panic when they realise Mrs. Fig can't take Harry in for the day. Now I think this is a perfect opportunity to introduce Piers Polkiss. I know he's not a major character or anything, but I do just think it's important again to see this character development, this different side to Dudley, seeing the juxtaposition between how he acts with his parents and how he acts with his friends, and yeah, as I mentioned before, just getting that character development. You know, some of the scenes with the Dursleys in the book are some of my favourite scenes, and I'm hoping that we get to see most of them, if not all of them, in the TV series. 3 words: ton, tongue, toffee. Then, of course, we get the whole sequence of the trip to the zoo. We see Dudley and Piers getting more and more unbearable. We get to see Harry's subtle enjoyment of being out for the day. And, of course, as I mentioned before, Uncle Vernon nearly crashing the car when Harry tells them about his dream. The escape of the snake is obviously key. Pretty much, again, how it is in the movie. I think they did a great job. But remember, the snake is a boa constrictor from Brazil, not from Burma. And even though we do have a lot more time with the TV series, I do still suggest trimming the fat a little bit here. We don't really need to see Dudley and Piers' extravagant stories about how the snake tried to wrap himself around Piers. We don't need to see about the zookeeper blabbering about where did the glass go. Just like in the movie, we just kind of focus a lot more on Harry and him just kind of shocked and surprised about how this could have happened. We then move into what I would call the third sequence of the show. So far, we've had the Dursleys, essentially the prologue, and McGonagall and Dumbledore and Hagrid in Privet Drive. I think that's sequence 1. And then you'd have sequence 2, which is Dudley's birthday and the whole trip to the zoo and everything that happens there with the snake. And then obviously by the time they get home, then that would probably be another advert break after that. So then, as I mentioned, we get into sequence 3, which is the letters from No One chapter. Again, the movie actually did a really great job with this whole sequence, in my opinion. What we would like to see is just things getting even more ludicrous. I especially like the scene with Harry coming downstairs to try and intercept the postman before treading on Uncle Vernon, who's sleeping by the door in a sleeping bag. We'd obviously still have the iconic scene with the letters coming through the chimney. Again, very similar to how it is in the movie. I would then also like to include the whole sequence of them driving to the hotel, staying the night there, only to find a dozen letters at the front desk when they wake up the next morning. Again, I think it's just a really good way of highlighting how Harry just can't escape his magical destiny. Finally, we arrive at the climax of the episode, with Uncle Vernon borrowing the boat and a suspicious long package from a fisherman, and the Dursleys and Harry travelling via the boat to the hut on the rock. And here is where I was faced with my first big decision. Do we end the episode in the same way that chapter 3 of the book ends, with Hagrid arriving and knocking on the door, or do we go a little bit further? We all know that the best TV shows often end with a dramatic cliffhanger, so you are desperate to tune in for the following week. Obviously, a giant knocking on the door of the cabin is a cliffhanger, but I feel like we could do a little bit better for the first episode of the series. So we would have Hagrid breaking the door down, intimidating the Dursleys, of course tying Uncle Vernon's rifle into a knot. The climax of the episode would build and build and build, with Uncle Vernon and Petunia getting more and more panicked, with Uncle Vernon eventually shouting at Hagrid to stop, before Hagrid leaves us with our dramatic cliffhanger and says the iconic line, "Harry, you're a wizard." Cue the music and the credits of episode 1. Like most big budget TV shows, this episode is going to start with a quick recap of what happened in episode 1. Obviously, we ended with that iconic cliffhanger, "Harry, you're a wizard." Probably one of the most iconic cliffhangers that we're ever going to get in this entire series. It left the audience hanging as Harry learned about his new identity, and we will jump straight into Harry's reaction, including Hagrid's explanation of Hogwarts, Dumbledore, Harry's brief backstory, and everything else that's magical. Of course, we'll have the Dursleys' reaction and their outrage to everything that Hagrid is telling him, and we will have the moment of Hagrid giving Dudley his pigtail. We would then jump to Harry waking up at the hut on the rock, still not really daring to believe what happened. In the book it says that he keeps his eyes closed and hears a tapping, and it must be Aunt Petunia knocking on his cupboard door. But then when he opens his eyes, his coat falls off him, and he notices Hagrid sleeping by the fire, and the tapping is actually coming from an owl at the window. Then he opens the window, the owl flies in and starts attacking Hagrid's coat. Hagrid then tells Harry to pay the owl, so Harry starts rummaging through all of Hagrid's pockets, finding humbugs and slug pellets, and finally finding the money. It's a small moment, but as we have time, it is something that I would like to include because, again, it just builds that whimsical flavour even more than in the movie, and it just gives that gradual introduction for Harry of anything out of the ordinary. Then we move on to the boat ride with Hagrid and Harry leaving the hut on the rock. Hagrid then enchants the boat to go faster, and yet again it's just another small introduction for Harry to the wizarding world, seeing magic used properly for the first time. The leaky cauldron scene will be very similar to the movie. I think they did a good job there, but I really want to emphasise the magical and mystical atmosphere within the pub even more so. I enjoy reading Harry's description of characters that he sees in the pub, like old ladies bickering in the corner and mysterious hooded figures. So if we could get a little more screen time of characters like that in the pub, again, I just think it helps build that atmosphere. And then when Harry meets Quirrell, I want to ensure that he is wearing plain robes with no turban just yet. And then when we see him later on in the Great Hall wearing his purple turban, we get that visual cue that something's off. It's something that Harry notices is odd in the book, but obviously in the movie he's just wearing the turban from the moment we meet him. The ending of sequence 1 of episode 2 will be the reveal of Diagon Alley. Hagrid and Harry will go to the back of the leaky cauldron, they'll tap the brick in the wall will open up, and we will get that grand wide view of Diagon Alley and Harry's look of shock and awe before we are hit with our first advert break. Again, it's just one of those mini cliffhangers that will stick with you as you are sitting through the advert break, making you desperate for the adverts to end so you can see what's going to happen next. So sequence 2 will start with Harry and Hagrid walking down Diagon Alley, similar to the movie, with Hagrid pointing out different shops and where Harry needs to go to pick up some of his school supplies. And I want to flesh this out a little bit more than the movie does. In the movie we saw brief flashes of different shops, but I would like to see even more shops included in much more detail. I'd like to see the magical menagerie, the apothecary, and of course, Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlour. We then get the Gringotts scene and the introduction to goblins. I think this is really important to emphasise goblins and their place in society, as again it will become very important for later seasons. We then get the Gringotts cart ride down to the vaults, which will provide a really nice fast-paced moment, as again the best TV shows need their ups and downs for every single episode. We didn't get that scene in the Philosopher's Stone movie, although we did see it in Deathly Hallows Part 2. I did enjoy that scene in Deathly Hallows Part 2, but I have a slightly different vision to how it could be in this show. Whenever I've read this scene, I've always envisioned something slightly different, something a little bit more claustrophobic and tight in some areas, with wider areas in other parts, kind of flashing through different caves that Harry gets glimpses in. Of course, he sees fire emitting from one and wonders if that could be a dragon. This is obviously a little bit different from the Deathly Hallows Part 2 interpretation, where they're flying through giant caverns with waterfalls while the cart spins around and around. Again, I did like this, but it's these little moments where you can tweak something, add a little bit more style that can make it really feel very different from the movies. And then when they get to the vaults, the rest of the Gringotts scene will play out pretty much exactly like the Philosopher's Stone film. After Gringotts, Hagrid will head to the Leaky Cauldron for a pick-me-up, as the cart ride didn't agree with him, and then we will get a scene that was completely left out of the movie, but something that I think is crucial to include here. This is of course Harry heading to Madame Malkin's to get his robes, and our first introduction to Draco Malfoy, although we don't meet him by name yet. Even though Harry doesn't learn his name yet, his discomfort for Malfoy's arrogance and dismissiveness is crucial for setting up their rivalry early. Again, it's just one of those small scenes that I will absolutely love to see brought to life. Next, we have the Ollivander scene, and I mean, let's just be honest, you don't really need to change anything here. John Hurt's performance as Ollivander is absolutely iconic, the whole scene is phenomenal, and yeah, I think you just basically keep it exactly the same, with Ollivander's mysterious aura carrying the scene and the magical moment where Harry's wand chooses him. Then Hagrid gives Harry Hedwig, and they head to Florian Fortescue's for ice cream. Any excuse to go back to Florian Fortescue's, honestly, one of my favourite characters, even though we only briefly meet him in the books, but it's somewhere where I would absolutely love to spend all of my time if I was in the wizarding world. And whilst they eat their ice creams, Harry will explain his confusion and concern for everything he doesn't know, and Hagrid will give Harry that brief explanation of why he's famous. Finally, sequence 2 of this episode will end with Hagrid taking Harry onto the train to go back to the Dursleys for one more month. In the movies, they go straight to King's Cross Station, but again, I want to keep this as similar to the books as possible, so we'll have an emotional moment with Harry waving goodbye to Hagrid as he heads off back to Privet Drive for his final month. This will mark the end of sequence 2 and our next advert break. And now we reach episode 2, third and final sequence, which will cover chapter 6, The Journey from Platform 9 3/4. We get a quick montage of Harry's final month at Privet Drive, with the Dursleys being terrified of him, Dudley refusing to stay in the same room with him, etc, etc, before we get Harry asking Uncle Vernon to take him to King's Cross Station the next day. Uncle Vernon agrees, and the next scene will be them dropping him off at King's Cross Station, laughing at him when he realises he doesn't know where Platform 9 3/4 is. We then follow the story very closely to the movie for a while, with Harry meeting the Weasleys for the first time, getting onto Platform 9 3/4, and finally getting on the train. Just like in the movie, Ron will join Harry in his compartment and they'll proceed to buy all of their snacks, whilst Ron informs Harry much more about things in the wizarding world. We definitely need to include Harry properly reading Dumbledore's Chocolate Frog card, of course. I want the audience as well to get that first mention of Nicholas Flamel, so we have that clue going forward, as again it will become very important in a later episode of this season. Now at this point we probably will be running out of time. I'd imagine there's only 10 minutes or so until the end of the episode, so I don't think we can include absolutely everybody coming in and out of Harry and Ron's cabin. In the book we get Neville, then Hermione, then Draco, Crabbe and Goyle, and then Hermione again. However, I do love the scene where Scabbers bites Goyle's finger when he tries to take their snacks, so we have to try and cram that in somehow, especially as it will give another small action moment, which again adds to that ups and downs that we need in every episode. Once Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle leave, we will then get our first introduction to Hermione and pretty much follow exactly what the movie did. I think that was great. And now we finally reach our climax of episode 2, with the iconic entrance to Hogwarts. The students arrive at the station, they meet Hagrid, they go down to the boats, and take that boat journey across the lake, and we get the iconic view of Hogwarts Castle. And quickly, while we're on the castle, I do want to change some things, obviously, about the atmosphere and appearance of certain locations, such as the Gringotts cart ride. However, that Hogwarts skyline is so iconic that, personally, I would try and just keep it very, very, very similar to the movies, if not just exactly the same. I just think it's too iconic to introduce us to anything else, to be honest with you. The students and Hagrid will then enter the castle, and the episode will end in the same way as the chapter, with Hagrid arriving at the big doors and knocking 3 times before we cut to black and the credits hit. We begin episode 3, as always, with a quick recap of Harry's journey so far. We see his journey from Diagon Alley to the Hogwarts Express and finally to Hogwarts, and Hagrid knocking on the door 3 times, which was our big cliffhanger to the end of the last episode. The title sequence then rolls before we properly open the episode with McGonagall's iconic speech to the first years about the different houses and how they'll be like their family. We'll make sure that we focus on some of the first years' faces and their looks of nervousness and just terror by the prospect of doing this in front of the whole school. I particularly want to hear Harry and Ron's discussion theorising about what's going to happen and how they're going to be sorted into their particular houses, with Ron saying he heard it's a test and that Fred said it hurts a lot. We then get our grand epic entrance into the Great Hall, just as it is described in the books. Although the movie did do a very good job with this scene as well. We'll then get the sorting, but first we will get the Sorting Hat's song. Although we might have to cut it down slightly from how it is in the book. It's a very long song, I think 32 lines in all, so we'll have to trim that down a little bit in order to allow time for other important scenes later. The sorting scene then continues, very similar to the movie. We'll make sure that we focus on Harry's face and his nervousness as his name gets closer and closer. The rest of the scene, including Harry's discussion with the Sorting Hat, his sorting into Gryffindor, and the subsequent feast, will continue very similar to the movie. I really enjoyed this. I thought they did a really good job. We then get our first look at Snape and Harry's pain in his scar as he locks eyes with him, and also him noticing Quirrell looking very peculiar in a purple turban. After the feast, I'm a little bit undecided on whether or not to include the Hogwarts song. I actually really enjoy this in the book, especially with the Weasleys doing their slow funeral march rendition with Dumbledore conducting them with his wand. I absolutely love that. But I don't think even the most die-hard Harry Potter fans can defend that deleted scene from the Goblet of Fire movie. That was horrendous. So I don't know, should it be included, kind of like the Sorting Hat song, maybe just a condensed version? Let me know in the comments because I'd really like to know your opinions. So, after the feast is over, Percy will lead the Gryffindors to the common room through the castle, and finally, after all this time, Peeves. The show finally gives the poltergeist his due, cackling as he torments the first years, pelting them with chalk and being outrageously rude to everybody he comes across. I cannot wait to finally see this character brought to life. And sequence 1 of the episode will end with Harry lying in his new bed in the common room, surrounded by his new friends and people who finally accept him, before he finally drifts off to sleep and has a really flashy and snappy dream where we see Snape's face, Malfoy's face, the Sorting Hat, and a flash of green light and cackling laughter before we cut to black for the end of sequence 1. So sequence 2 of this episode is really going to focus on Harry's introduction to Hogwarts and his classes. I really want to give Hogwarts its time to shine in the new TV series, as I really believe it to almost be a character in itself with real personality. While the movies had to condense Harry's first few weeks into a couple of scenes, this series gets to linger. We'll get to see Harry learning Hogwarts, not just the classes, but the school and castle itself. The staircases rearranging mid-step, portraits giving wildly unhelpful directions, Filch and Mrs. Norris popping up in unexpected places to try and catch rule breakers, and Peeves also popping up everywhere and pelting Harry and Ron with ink bombs as they make their way to class. I also want to see Harry actually attending numerous classes, as in the movie, all we really got to see in terms of actually learning anything was a brief introduction to levitation spells. In the show, I'd imagine a sort of montage of Harry in different classes. We'd get to see him in charms, transfiguration, herbology, even astronomy. And then we get our full introduction to Snape. And it is brutal. The same iconic bullying, just like in the movies, but now we'll get a proper introduction to the potions and ingredients themselves, like in the books, such as asphodel, wormwood, and bezoars. They're not just snark here like they are in the movie, they're actually lore. Again, the main purpose of this sequence is to introduce Harry and Ron and his classmates and the viewers to life at Hogwarts and studying magic for the first time. And in all honesty, it will probably be a fairly short sequence as we have a bumper Sequence 3 coming up. Sequence 3 starts with the flying lesson. I want this whole sequence to be incredibly snappy, with Neville's remembrall, Malfoy's bullying, and of course Harry's incredible moment on the broom. This is done perfectly in the movie, let's be completely honest here, so we don't need to spend too much time rehashing something that was already done so well, especially due to the fact that we'll be starting to run out of time for this episode. We would, however, get to see Wood, like in the movie, however this time we'll really get to see that manic excitement when McGonagall introduces him to Harry. We then cut to dinner time that evening, where Malfoy challenges Harry to a midnight duel. Something that was left out completely from the movie. Our climax of the episode will begin that night with Harry and Ron sneaking out of Gryffindor common room to go and challenge Malfoy. Hermione will try to stop them as they exit and ends up following them out. This, just like in the movie, really highlights her stubbornness and rule-following nature before she really starts to become slightly more rebellious as the trio forms and the series progresses. Outside the common room, they'll bump into Neville, who's forgotten the passwords again to the Gryffindor common room, and the four of them will head to the trophy room to meet Malfoy together. This whole sequence of them creeping through the castle at night will be incredibly tense and foreboding, with muttering and snoring coming from the different portraits, pale ghosts drifting by them as they walk, and suits of armour creaking ominously as they pass. When they finally arrive at the common room, they realise Malfoy tricked them into being caught by Filch, who turns up looking for students out of bed. The four run for it, before bumping into Peeves, who raises the alarm even further. They go pelting down corridors, left, right, left again. This scene just builds and builds and builds until they burst through a locked door and slam it behind them, locking it as they do so. During the soon-to-be trio's discussion about what just happened and Malfoy's trick, Harry notices Neville tugging on the edge of his robes. Harry turns around, looks up, and sees a giant, three-headed dog baring its teeth, growling, and drool dripping everywhere. Cut to black and credits. What a cliffhanger. We open with our previously on Harry Potter recap. Harry's first weeks at Hogwarts, the midnight duel gone wrong, and that heart-stopping cliffhanger with Harry, Ron, Hermione and Neville stumbling across a giant three-headed dog. The episode immediately throws us straight into the chaos, with the kids screaming as the three-headed dog lunges at them, barely escaping and slamming the door shut behind them. Back in the Gryffindor common room, Neville bolts to bed, and Hermione drops that key detail that she noticed. It was standing on a trap door. We get a quick flashback from the day that Harry saw Hagrid taking a small grubby package from Gringotts. We then see a flashback of him reading the newspaper article about a Gringotts break-in from the previous day. This signifies to the audience that Harry has made the connection between what Hagrid was taking, what the thief was after in Gringotts, and what Fluffy could potentially be guarding. This then cues our title sequence for the show. After the title sequence, we begin the next morning at breakfast, with Harry and Ron sniggering at Malfoy's expression when he realises they haven't been caught out of bed the previous night. During breakfast, they have a short conversation about Harry's suspicion about what the dog could be guarding, and we see a shot of Hermione listening to them sneakily. The conversation is cut short, however, by a long package delivered to Harry by Hedwig. Harry reads the note attached to it that reads, "Do not open the parcel at the table. It contains your new Nimbus 2000, but I don't want everyone knowing you've got a broomstick, or they'll all want one. Oliver Wood will meet you tonight on the Quidditch pitch at 7 o'clock for your first training session. Professor M. McGonagall." We then cut to that evening with Harry arriving with his Nimbus 2000 to the Quidditch pitch to meet Oliver Wood for the first training session. Wood proceeds to explain all the different rules to Harry about Quidditch, including the positions and all of the balls. It's an absolute info dump, to be honest with you, like in the movie, but I mean, come on, you can't stop Wood when he's in his flow, can you? Harry then proceeds to have a training drill with Wood throwing golf balls for Harry to catch. He zooms around on his Nimbus 2000 in an extremely fast montage of shots, catching every single ball. The scene then ends with a close-up of Wood's face, grinning like a maniac. Now, in order to highlight the following time jump, I want the TV series to adopt a sort of motif in order to highlight the difference between seasons and months, similar to the movies actually. Think wide shots of the castle with colours of leaves changing. We'll see students running around, going to classes, playing and pranking each other. This particular motif will highlight the time jump to the end of October, and we will see a brief shot of Harry and Ron walking to Charms class through corridors that have been decorated for Halloween. During the Charms class, we will get the Wingardium Leviosa class, which will be done pretty much exactly like in the movie, as it was done perfectly, including Hermione's correction of Ron's pronunciation and movement, as well as her performing the spell absolutely perfectly. This prompts Ron to insult her as they leave the class, leaving Hermione to run past in tears. Sequence 1 of the episode will end with a close-up of Ron's face and his expression of guilt and discomfort. Something that I am desperate for the series to do is stray away from the representation that the movies had of Ron, often just simply treating him as comic relief instead of a complex character with many different layers. Justice for Ron. So, we begin an absolutely massive Sequence 2 with a wide grand shot of the Great Hall decorated for Halloween, with all the students present for the Halloween feast. It will look just as spectacular as in the movie, maybe even more so, with bats flying around, the ghosts drifting eerily through the tables, and jack-o'-lanterns hovering in the air. As we see Harry and Ron enjoying their food, they overhear Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil discussing about how Hermione has been locked in the bathroom all afternoon, crying. As Harry and Ron share a concerned look, Professor Quirrell bursts through the Great Hall doors and sprints all the way to the teacher's table. As he arrives in front of Dumbledore, he gasps about a troll loose in the dungeon before fainting on the floor. During the commotion and evacuation of the Great Hall, Harry and Ron suddenly realise that Hermione doesn't know about the troll, so they rush off to go and find her. As they are running, I like the idea of Harry asking Ron about trolls and Ron giving him a brief explanation about how they're stupid and where it might have come from, and as he does so, we could get some flashes from the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them book about mountain trolls. We could even have Newt Scamander even narrating the information given. On their way, they actually come across the troll that had left the dungeon and wandered into a vacant room. Harry and Ron come up with the brilliant idea to lock it in the room it had just entered. They do so, and as they are congratulating themselves on their wonderful plan, they hear a scream and realise they had locked it in the girls' bathroom with Hermione. They burst into the room and, like in the movie, proceed to save Hermione with a combination of Harry jumping on the back of the troll like a lunatic and Ron using Wingardium Leviosa to knock the troll out using its own club. Shortly after the battle, McGonagall, Snape and Quirrell arrive, and the conversation proceeds just like in the movie, with
with Hermione taking the blame for looking for the troll and McGonagall proceeding to dock her some points before dismissing her from the bathroom. McGonagall then turns to Harry and Ron and proceeds to award them some points before sending them back to the common room as well. When they arrive at the common room, they find it full of all of the students enjoying the food from the feast that was sent up to the common room, and they notice Hermione sitting alone in the corner. They go and sit next to her, and the three of them share a small smile and a word of thanks, which indicates to the audience that this is the start of an iconic friendship. Cue a cut to black and the end of sequence 2. Now, I know a lot of people might be worried that the next sequence and chapter of the book might be pretty rushed, as sequence 2 was fairly long and extremely action-packed. However, you will see shortly that we will not be covering the entirety of chapter 11, Quidditch, in this episode. Sequence 3 will start with the freshly formed trio sitting outside in a courtyard, huddled around a bright blue flame in a jam jar that Hermione had conjured. As they are talking and reading, Snape comes out and proceeds to confiscate a book and dock Gryffindor points from Harry for taking a library book out into the school grounds. After the incident, Harry exclaims how unfair that was, and they notice Snape limping back into the castle. Later on, due to his nerves about the upcoming Quidditch match, Harry decides to go and ask Snape for his book back, something that Ron heavily advises him not to do. Once he gets to the staff room, he notices the door is ajar and slowly peeks inside, and to his horror, he sees Filch attending to Snape's leg that has been badly injured. Harry tries to sneak out quietly, but Snape sees him and screams at him to get out. Harry does what he is told and sprints from the room around a corner and pins himself against a wall. We get a close-up of Harry's face, followed by a montage of flashback shots just like the beginning of the episode. Hagrid taking something from Gringotts, the Gringotts break-in newspaper article, Fluffy, the trapdoor, and Snape's leg with a huge bite mark. We finish the episode with a close-up on Harry's eyes as they widen in shock. Cue to black and the credits roll. As usual, the episode will start with our Previously on Harry Potter segment. This recap will highlight 3 key elements from the previous episode that will impact this episode. Firstly, Harry's introduction to Quidditch with Oliver Wood. Then we summarise the troll attack in the girls' bathroom, before recapping the cliffhanger with Harry seeing Snape's injured leg and his realisation that he must have been trying to get past the giant 3-headed dog. That episode and the recap ended with an extreme close-up on Harry's face, and this episode will cut straight to another close-up of Harry's face, this time looking pale and nervous. The camera slowly zooms out, and we see that Harry is sitting in the Great Hall at breakfast, dressed in his Quidditch robes, nervously awaiting his first ever Quidditch match. I want to make sure we include conversations with some of Harry's other friends, like Seamus, trying to make him feel better about the Quidditch match, but not doing a very good job at it. These conversations really flesh out the school environment, and again just make the whole place and Harry's friendships and relationships seem more believable. We then have a short sequence of Harry trudging down to the Quidditch pitch, sitting through Oliver Wood's team talk, and nervously awaiting the match. I want this to be done in such a way that we really feel the gravity of Harry's nerves and apprehension, perhaps using dullish colours and muffled audio to really highlight how Harry is sort of numb to everything that is going on around him. We then have the Quidditch match. The main difference of this scene from what we saw in the movie will be the overall visual presentation of Quidditch. We will be able to fully harness modern CGI to make the most realistic and visceral version of Quidditch ever seen. As I said though, the actual Quidditch match will follow very closely to what we saw in the movie, with an initial sequence of the match starting, Hermione and Ron, who are with Hagrid, noticing on the binoculars what they think to be Snape jinxing Harry's broom. Hermione rushes off to set Snape's robes on fire, knocking Quirrell headfirst into the row in front of him. Harry then streaks off to catch the snitch by almost swallowing it. Again, this whole sequence will be pretty much identical to the movie, a little bit more fleshed out, and the main difference being the visual presentation of it. Sequence 1 of the episode will end with Harry meeting up with Ron, Hermione and Hagrid, where they discuss the events that just transpired. They explain how they are suspicious of Snape, and Hagrid lets slip the first mention of Nicholas Flamel. Sequence 2 of the episode will start with one of our Hogwarts changing motifs, with snow starting to fall and covering the grounds, and we'll see students going about their day around a Hogwarts that is now decorated for Christmas. We would definitely see a clip of Fred and George bewitching snowballs to follow Quirrell around, bouncing off his turban. If you know, you know. We then cut to the Gryffindor common room, with Harry and Ron engaged in a thrilling battle of Wizard's chess, and just like with the Quidditch, using modern day CGI, we'll be able to really bring its brutal nature fully to life. Picture literally a miniature battle happening right on the tabletop. Again, using modern day technology, this whole sequence could be incredible. Hermione then joins them and informs them that she is going home for a short break during the Christmas holidays, and she reminds them to keep on researching who Nicholas Flamel is. We then jump to Christmas Day morning, with Harry waking up, finding a pile of presents at the foot of his bed. And I really want the show to capture Harry's excitement as he opens Christmas presents for the first time in his life. We'll get to see the different presents that we didn't get to see in the movie, such as Mrs. Weasley's fudge and Christmas jumper, Hagrid sending Harry the flute, Hermione sending him a large pile of chocolate frogs, which will become important later on in the episode, and of course, the Dursleys sending Harry a 50p piece. The present opening session then ends with the iconic moment of Harry opening the invisibility cloak. Now, instead of us cutting straight to that evening like the movie does, with Harry testing out the invisibility cloak, I really want to at least include a short montage of Harry and the Weasleys enjoying Christmas Day at Hogwarts. This won't be too long due to time constraints, but I really want to capture that magic of Hogwarts at Christmas, as so many people consider it to be an absolutely iconic look for Hogwarts. We'd see Fred and George forcing the Weasley jumper onto Percy before they all head down for Christmas dinner in the Great Hall. We definitely see the magic wizard crackers that emit huge bangs and puffs of smoke, along with wizard and witches' hats when you pull on them. We'd have a short clip of Harry and the Weasleys having a snowball fight outside, before cutting to the Gryffindor common room where they enjoy turkey sandwiches and trifle, before all getting very sleepy and heading to bed. That evening we catch up with Harry in bed, holding the invisibility cloak in his hands. We get a close-up of his eyes as they gleam with excitement, and the next thing we know, we are cutting to Harry wandering through the library under the invisibility cloak to look up Nicholas Flamel. Like in the movie, as he is looking through books in the restricted section, he opens a book which starts to scream. He slams it shut and hears Filch approaching, so he hastily retreats and finds a door slightly ajar to an abandoned classroom. He slips inside, and as he is catching his breath, he notices a giant mirror standing in the corner of the room. He slowly approaches the mirror and notices a whole group of people staring back at him and waving. He draws closer, and as he looks at the two people closest to him, he realizes who they are and softly utters, "Mum? Dad?" before we cut to black to end sequence 2. Sequence 3 of the episode starts at breakfast the next day, with Harry recounting to Ron the events of the previous night, with Ron being annoyed that Harry didn't wake him up. Harry tells Ron that he'll take him tonight, and we cut to that evening with Harry and Ron under the invisibility cloak going back to the mirror. When they arrive, they have a scuffle as they each try and fight to be in front of the mirror, with Ron seeing himself as head boy, Quidditch captain, winning the Quidditch Cup, but Harry saying that he just wants to see his family. During the small scuffle, they hear a noise that they think must be Filch, and they proceed to retreat from the room. As they arrive back at the common room, Ron advises Harry not to go back to the mirror again. However, we cut again to Harry the next night in front of the mirror, staring at his family. We then get the iconic talk with Dumbledore as he was waiting for Harry really giving John Lithgow his first true moment to shine as Dumbledore. I especially want to see Dumbledore's kind and gentle nature, as well as his more whimsical side when Harry asks him what he sees in the mirror, and he replies he sees himself receiving a new pair of socks. I truly do believe Lithgow will do an incredible job as Dumbledore. I've seen a lot of his work before, and he is honestly a phenomenal actor. The episode then ends with one final sequence, and for the first time I am going to be reshuffling things a little bit from how they are presented in the book, so we are able to end this episode on a cliffhanger that also nicely ties together the beginning and start of the episode. We see Harry, Ron and Hermione, who has now returned from her Christmas break, sitting in the common room. Suddenly, the fat lady's portrait bursts open, and Neville comes hopping into the common room, saying that Malfoy hit him with a leg-locking curse. Hermione then uses the counter curse on him, and to make Neville feel better, Harry gives him one of the chocolate frogs from Hermione's Christmas present. Neville expresses his thanks to Harry, and proceeds to give Harry the chocolate frog card, which Harry sees is Dumbledore. Harry looks at the card, and suddenly jumps to his feet, exclaiming, "I found Nicholas Flamel." Hermione suddenly sprints up to the dormitory and returns with a giant book, which she slams open and proceeds to read. Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. The trio stare at each other before we cut to black and credits. The episode starts with previously on Harry Potter, recapping the events from the previous episode, along with a few other things that are important for the overall mystery. We briefly see the events regarding the Mirror of Erised, and a brief snippet of the conversation between Dumbledore and Harry. We then recap the robbery at Gringotts, the discovery of a giant three-headed dog named Fluffy by Hagrid, and the uncovering of the Philosopher's Stone from the end of the previous episode. And finally, the incident at the Quidditch match, where they saw Snape jinxing Harry's broom and trying to kill him. This is the final clip of the recap because this episode will start at the end of a muddy training session with the Gryffindor Quidditch team. As they are getting changed, Oliver Wood informs the team that Snape will be refereeing their upcoming match against Hufflepuff. Shocked by the startling news of Snape's desire to suddenly become a Quidditch referee, we then cut to Harry in the Gryffindor common room talking to Ron and Hermione. They both try to convince Harry not to play, but Harry, being our brave hero, insists on participating in the match. Harry says, "If I don't play, all the Slytherins will think I'm too scared to face Snape. I'll show them. It'll really wipe the smiles off their faces if we win." We cut to black, which cues the title sequence for the show. The following scene takes heavy inspiration from not only how the scene is portrayed in the book, but also from suggestions that many people have made in the comments about wanting to see more things not from Harry's perspective. We pick up with Ron and Hermione walking down to the Quidditch pitch with the rest of the school, who are all excitedly discussing their predictions for the match. They filter into the stadium just in time to see the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff teams from a distance walking onto the pitch, and as Snape blows his whistle, the camera switches focus to Ron and Hermione nervously watching the game. The rest of the scene then plays out in one continuous, unbroken shot. Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle then appear behind Hermione, Ron and Neville, and we get the incredible moment where Neville and Ron fight the Slytherin trio whilst Hermione nervously watches the match. I have this vision of the camera relentlessly swiveling around to catch the fight, and then Hermione watching the match, and then the Quidditch match from afar before swiveling back to the fight again. I really think this would be an incredibly stylistic sequence, especially with the focus being what's going on in the stands instead of what's going on the Quidditch pitch, as we've just had a major Quidditch match in the previous episode. The scene then concludes with a POV shot from Hermione's binoculars of Harry streaking towards Snape before shooting past him to catch the snitch. The scene then shifts to Harry leaving the changing room later on in the evening with his Nimbus 2000 over his shoulder. As he is heading back to the castle, he sees a hooded figure in the distance that he recognises as Snape, so he hops on his Nimbus 2000 to silently follow him from above. He hovers above the trees before witnessing the meeting between Snape and Quirrell and seeing what he believes to be Snape threatening Quirrell into helping him to capture the Philosopher's Stone. The scene then ends with Snape leaving Quirrell standing nervously alone, whilst Harry is hovering above them, looking shocked. We cut to black to end sequence 1. Before I go on, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the support I've received on the channel so far. It's been absolutely incredible, and I'm so grateful to all of you. And if I could ask a huge favour and ask you to subscribe and drop a like, it will really help me out as I look to grow this channel even further. Anyway, let's hop back into the episode with the start of sequence 2. Sequence 2 will begin with Harry, Ron and Hermione discussing the events in the Gryffindor common room of what Harry just witnessed. Ron confirms his long-standing suspicion of Snape, and Hermione correctly theorises that there must be other things guarding the stone. This short scene ends with the trio resigning themselves to the fact that they need to keep an eye on Snape, Quirrell and Fluffy. We then move into a new Hogwarts changing motif, highlighting the change from winter to spring, with the Hogwarts grounds becoming greener and greener. We will also see short montage clips of the trio walking past Fluffy's door and pressing their ear against it, and smiling at Quirrell in an encouraging way whenever they walk past him in the corridor. We then jump to the library with the trio studying hard for their upcoming exams, before they notice Hagrid looking very out of place in the library. I love the idea of Hagrid squeezing himself between bookshelves and doing a terrible job at hiding himself when Harry sees him. We then get the interaction between them, with Hagrid inviting the trio down to his cabin that evening, and once he leaves, the trio go to investigate what books Hagrid was studying. When they realise that Hagrid was studying dragons, the show gives Ron another chance to shine as he informs Harry and Hermione all about dragons and the laws on dragon breeding. Like an idea I had in my episode 4 video, when Ron was explaining to Harry all about trolls, I would like to include some excerpts from the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them book, all about dragons, and again, potentially getting Newt Scamander to narrate the information given. And a slight change from what we saw in the movie and the book will be the camera slowly panning from the trio's conversation to a neighbouring aisle, where we will see Draco Malfoy eavesdropping slyly on their conversation. And another change will be, instead of the trio visiting Hagrid's twice to see the egg and then to see the egg hatching, the scene with Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback will play out pretty much identically to the movie. However, this time I would like to see a little more shock and fear from the trio rather than the amazement they displayed in the movie, especially when Hermione says, "Hagrid, you live in a wooden house." The sequence then ends as they notice a pale, pointed face staring through the window. They run to the window and see Draco Malfoy retreating back to the castle. We cut to black to end sequence 2. Sequence 3 of the episode takes place in a way that also mixes events fairly heavily from what we saw in the movie and in the book, and I'll explain why at the end of the video. We pick up with the trio begrudgingly walking down to Hagrid's hut, discussing the situation that has rapidly developed over the past week. Whilst at Hagrid's, when they see the size of Norbert now, Harry comes up with the idea to write to Ron's brother Charlie, who works with dragons in Romania. And after a lot of discussion and much convincing, Hagrid finally agrees. We then cut to the Gryffindor common room a few days later on the night that they are supposed to meet up with Charlie's friends, with Harry and Hermione sitting in the common room waiting for Ron. Neville then comes into the common room and tells Harry and Hermione that Ron has been admitted in the hospital wing after being bitten by something. Harry and Hermione then rush off to the hospital wing to go and see Ron, and as they leave, Neville tries shouting a word of warning to them as they are clambering out of the portrait hole about Malfoy. However, they don't pay any attention to Neville as they are in such a rush to go and see Ron. When they arrive in the hospital wing, Ron tells them in a panic that Malfoy came to borrow a book from Ron, when really he just wanted to sneer at Ron, and the book that he borrowed contained Charlie's reply letter. However, Harry and Hermione realise it's too late to change the plan, and we arrive at our climax scene
of the episode. Harry and Hermione arrive at Hagrid's cabin to collect Norbert in a crate before smuggling him under the invisibility cloak back into the castle. On their way to the tallest tower, they come across Malfoy being accosted by Professor McGonagall, who was trying to catch Harry and Hermione out of bed. Laughing at Malfoy, they head to the top of the tower and meet Charlie's friends before helping them to attach Norbert's crate to their brooms. They head back down the spiral staircase, still laughing at Malfoy, and as they open the door at the bottom of the stairs, they see Filch's face loom out of the darkness, grinning maniacally as they realise they had left the invisibility cloak at the top of the tower. Cue the credits. Previously on Harry Potter recaps moments from the series that mainly cover the overall mystery, with the discovery of the Philosopher's Stone and that it is being guarded by Hagrid's giant three-headed dog Fluffy. We then get reminded of the trio's suspicion of Snape, and we see the clip of Harry witnessing the meeting between Snape and Quirrell. We get the recap of Hagrid saying that he won a dragon egg from a stranger in the Hogshead. This will be very important at the end of this episode. And finally, we see Harry and Hermione getting caught by Filch after they had handed Norbert over to Charlie's friends in the middle of the night. We pick up immediately from the cliffhanger of the previous episode, with Harry and Hermione being escorted to Professor McGonagall's office. As the door to her office opens, to their horror, they see Neville sitting in a chair looking devastated. Neville looks up and accidentally reveals their dragon's secret, with McGonagall assuming that they have played a cruel prank on Malfoy and Neville. Deeply disappointed, McGonagall assigns them each detention and deducts 50 points from each of them, crushing Gryffindor's chances for the House Cup. The weight of their actions leaves Harry looking horrified, and this cues the title sequence for the show. After the title sequence, we open with a shot of the House Point hourglasses, with Gryffindor's looking close to empty. We then have a montage of clips of Harry, Hermione and Neville enduring a fair amount of snide comments and cold shoulders as a result of losing so many house points. I really want the show to emphasise the importance of this, as often in the movies they didn't treat the characters as school children, where things like house points are incredibly important. It just makes the characters and the school environment seem so much more believable if we include touches like this. We end this montage of shots with Harry walking down a corridor, enduring sneering comments from Slytherins, before he rounds a corner and hears Quirrell sobbing and pleading in a classroom, seemingly threatened by someone unseen. Suspecting Snape was the intimidator, Harry reports this to Hermione and Ron, who are sitting in the library, but their conversation is cut short by the arrival of Neville, who is looking downcast with a couple of notes for Harry and Hermione. The notes read, "Your detention will take place at 11 o'clock tonight. Meet Mr. Filch in the entrance hall. Professor M. McGonagall." We then cut to that evening with Harry, Hermione, Neville and Malfoy heading down to the Forbidden Forest for their detention, with Filch taunting them with stories of medieval punishments as he leads the way. During the walk, I want to see some beautiful shots of Hogwarts at night, lighting up familiar areas in an eerie and mysterious way, rather than the warmness that we've experienced so far. The scene ends with Filch dropping the four off with Hagrid, who informs them they have a job to do in the Forbidden Forest. The group stands at the forest's edge, with Hagrid's lamp illuminating a path leading into the dark trees as a foreboding wind blows. A cut to black brings sequence 1 to a close. Sequence 2 begins with Hagrid leading the four students into the forest after finding traces of unicorn blood. Hagrid explains how unicorns, being pure and magical, are not easily harmed, so the fact there is unicorn blood around suggests that something dark is at work. Once again, as we learn about unicorns, the information given will be presented from the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them book. The group splits into two. Hagrid, Hermione and Harry take one path, whilst Malfoy, Neville and Fang take the other. Now, at the beginning of the video, I discussed the rumours of what rating should the show be, and in my opinion, they should go for a TV-14 rating right from the very first season. This Forbidden Forest sequence presents the perfect opportunity to set a crucial and consistent tone. This is where the series can show us the difference between something that is scary for kids and legitimately unsettling. Taking this into account, the atmosphere will grow more unsettling as they proceed through the forest, before two centaurs emerge from the bushes and we are introduced to Ronan and Bane. When Hagrid asks them if they've seen anything unusual, they avoid direct answers, but their mysterious nature suggests that they know something more. Centaur lore is something I find fascinating, and I hope the show will explore it even more in the future of the series. Meanwhile, Malfoy and Neville send up red sparks as Malfoy frightens Neville as a cruel joke. Hagrid angrily regroups them and puts Harry with Malfoy and sends them on their way. Harry, Malfoy and Fang continue deeper into the forest before they finally stumble across the unicorn. And once again, with the use of the TV-14 rating, we will really see how hauntingly beautiful yet tragic this sight is. The rest of the scene plays out exactly like in the movie, with Harry and Malfoy seeing a hooded figure swoop down on the unicorn. Malfoy retreats with Fang before Firenze the Centaur jumps in to scare the hooded figure away. He puts Harry on his back and they ride away, with Firenze hinting that the hooded figure was Voldemort, drinking the unicorn's blood to stay alive, and is here to steal the Philosopher's Stone. As they ride, they are confronted by Bane and Ronan from before, who angrily accuse Firenze of breaking Centaur tradition by aiding a human. Firenze dismisses their outrage by delivering Harry back to Hagrid before disappearing into the forest, leaving Harry shaken by the realization that Voldemort may be closer than anyone suspected. This shot of shock on Harry's face brings Sequence 2 to a close. Sequence 3 is mainly going to function as a way to set up the finale episode of Season 1. We open with Harry discussing the events in the forest with Ron and Hermione in the common room. They theorize that Snape must be stealing the stone to give to Voldemort. And when Harry heads to bed, he finds his invisibility cloak waiting on his bed with a note saying, "Just in case." We then cut to our final season-changing motif of Season 1, highlighting the time jump from spring to summer, with grass turning slightly brown and the sun burning down. We will then see a montage of students, including the trio, taking their end-of-year exams. I think it's important to include this because, once again, to make the whole student experience seem more believable and realistic, it'll be really cool to see the different students actually sitting their exams. In the aftermath of their exams, Harry, Ron and Hermione are relaxing in the school grounds. In a sudden moment of clarity, Harry realizes that the stranger that Hagrid won Norbert's egg from must have been working for Voldemort. Rushing to Hagrid's hut, the trio find out the unsettling truth. The stranger kept his face hidden, plied Hagrid with drinks, softened him up with the egg, finally manipulating him to revealing how to get past Fluffy by playing music. The trio now understands that Snape has the means to get past the three-headed dog to get the stone. Harry decides to go after the stone himself. Whilst Ron and Hermione are terrified, they refuse to let him face the danger alone. We then cut to that evening, which is the climax scene of this episode. Their nighttime mission is nearly thwarted by Neville, who tries to stop them from breaking any more rules before Hermione uses the full body bind curse on him. Using Harry's returned invisibility cloak, they sneak through the castle, and when they arrive at the third floor corridor, their worst fears are confirmed. Fluffy's door is already ajar. Realizing the stakes are higher than ever, with Voldemort's return hanging in the balance, Harry, Ron and Hermione steel themselves for whatever lies ahead. The camera zooms out, the music hits a huge crescendo, and we cut to black to end the episode on a massive cliffhanger, setting up a bumper finale. The previously on Harry Potter segment for the finale episode will do what is pretty common for season finales these days and recap the entire story of the season. Firstly, we get reminded of our introduction to Harry with the Dursleys and when Hagrid visits him with the news that turns his whole world upside down. We then see a brief recap of his journey to Diagon Alley and then on the Hogwarts Express, finally arriving at Hogwarts, before seeing clips of him in different classes, studying and playing Quidditch. Finally, we recap the key mystery with the discovery of the Philosopher's Stone, Fluffy, and the trio's assumption that Snape wants to steal the stone for Voldemort, after Harry saw Voldemort in the forest. The recap then ends with the final shot of the last episode, with the trio standing outside Fluffy's door, waiting to face the gauntlet of challenges ahead. We cut to black to bring the recap to a close, and then a title appears on the screen saying Halloween 10 years ago. We then see a cold open of Voldemort in Godric's Hollow attacking the Potters, emphasizing the moment with Lily sacrificing herself for Harry. This will be incredibly important for later on in the finale, instead of just relying on a massive info dump from Dumbledore to explain why certain things happen towards the end of the episode. Once the cold open finishes, the title sequence will roll. And after the title sequence, we cut to Harry, Ron and Hermione preparing to push open Fluffy's door to go through the trapdoor. The first sequence of this episode will be the trio encountering the different challenges to get to the Philosopher's Stone. And honestly, I do think the Philosopher's Stone movie did a good job with these challenges, so there's not going to be loads of changes, but there are definitely still some changes for each challenge, as well as some challenges that were left out of the movie entirely. So what I'm going to do is, instead of explaining exactly what happens in every single challenge, I'm just going to go through the challenges and explain what the change might be, or what we didn't see in the movie and what we will see now. Firstly, we will see the trio getting past Fluffy, and unlike in the movie where they use a bewitched harp, they will use the flute Harry received from Hagrid at Christmas, which we will have been reminded of in the recap. Harry plays a tune that lulls the dog to sleep, which allows them to slip past. Next, we have the pit filled with devil's snare that they fall in, and this will be very, very similar to the movie. However, once again, the show will have the chance to give justice to Ron, something that is becoming a bit of a heavy theme for this series, with him reminding Hermione that she is a witch when she starts panicking about not having wood to start a fire. And not only does this give Ron the chance to prove that he isn't just comic relief, it gives us a chance to see that Hermione, whilst incredibly clever, still has her flaws, which the movies often tended to completely ignore, making her just a perfect character. The trio move on into a room that contains wing keys and broomsticks, and to proceed to the next room they need to fly around and find the correct key for the door that leads to the next chamber. Once again, this will be pretty similar to the movie, however this time Ron and Hermione will both use brooms as well to help Harry to herd the keys towards him so he can catch the correct one. The giant chess game does play out identically to the movie because they did a phenomenal job. It's honestly one of my favourite Harry Potter scenes, to be honest, across any of the movies. Ron takes command, directing Harry and Hermione through the game, and at the end of the game, Ron sacrifices himself so Harry can checkmate the king. The key difference is after the game, with Ron being unconscious, and instead of, in the movie, Hermione staying with Ron, Harry and Hermione proceed together to face two more challenges that were left out completely from the movie. Harry and Hermione move into a chamber that contains a mountain troll, but luckily for them, it had already been knocked out. Relieved they don't have to fight it, they carefully step round it and enter one more chamber that contains potentially my favourite challenge from the book. The final obstacle they face is a logic puzzle set by Snape. 7 potions, some poison, some harmless, and only one that allows passage forward. Hermione deciphers the riddle, excitedly exclaiming that it's simply logic and some of the best wizards don't have an ounce of logic. I don't know what it is about this challenge, but I just really love it. I think it's a good way of building character development for Hermione and showing how brilliant she is, as well as highlighting that the wizarding world isn't just waving a wand and saying magic words. Realizing that there's only enough potion for one more sip, Harry insists that Hermione goes back to help Ron and find Dumbledore, while he goes on ahead. After drinking the potion, Harry passes through the black flames ahead, and as he squints into the final chamber, he sees someone standing there. Not Snape, not Voldemort, but Quirrell. We cut to black to end sequence 1. The first half of sequence 2 of this episode will be the confrontation between Harry and Quirrell/Voldemort. But before we get to the action-packed final moments, I really want the show to lean into the conversation between Quirrell and Harry, tying together all of the clues that we have seen in this season so far. Quirrell tells Harry that he, not Snape, has been trying to kill Harry all year, as he has been working for Voldemort. From jinxing his broom to unleashing the troll, it was all Quirrell, and Snape was actually trying to save Harry and stop Quirrell from getting the stone. As he explains all of this, we will see flashbacks from scenes we've seen already, but from different perspectives, this time focusing on Quirrell falling over when Hermione sets Snape's robes on fire, and when Snape decides to be a Quidditch referee, we'll see Quirrell's face looking furious. We'll also see a flashback of Harry witnessing the meeting between Quirrell and Snape, although this time with the context of Snape interrogating Quirrell to stop him from stealing the stone. After all of this, Quirrell looks into the mirror of Erised, and under Voldemort's orders, he tells Harry to come and look in the mirror. Harry does this, and when he looks in, he sees himself retrieving the Philosopher's Stone, which magically appears in his pocket. He lies to Quirrell, saying that he sees himself winning the house cut from Dumbledore, but Voldemort's voice says he's lying. And finally, we will see the reveal of Voldemort's face for the first time. As I've mentioned in the previous episode, I want the show to lean into a TV-14 rating. The Voldemort's face reveal will definitely need that, as I want it to be just as shocking as it is described in the books. With a ghostly pale face, gleaming red eyes, and slits for nostrils. The physical confrontation between Harry and Voldemort/Quirrell will be very similar to the movie, with Quirrell being unable to hold Harry and Harry seizing Quirrell to stop him from taking the stone. The only difference will be Quirrell's skin blistering instead of kind of turning into ashes like we saw in the movie. The scene ends with Harry passing out into darkness as he hears Voldemort's screams of "kill him" and Quirrell's screams of pain. The screen fades to black and all goes quiet. After a few seconds, we see a glinting light. For a moment, it looks like it might be the snitch before the picture comes into focus, and we see it as a pair of glasses, and Dumbledore's face looms out of the darkness, smiling down at Harry. Then comes Dumbledore's info dump. He tells Harry that the Philosopher's Stone has been destroyed to prevent Voldemort's return. He then goes on to explain many key truths. Snape protected Harry out of a lingering debt to James. The invisibility cloak used to belong to Harry's father. And the reason Quirrell couldn't touch Harry is because of the sacrifice Lily made, shielding Harry with the magic of love. This encounter highlights the importance of love over evil, the acceptance of morality, and the dangers of deception, setting the stage for Harry's ongoing battle with Voldemort. Sequence 2 of the episode ends with the iconic line from Dumbledore when he tries a Bertie Bott's flavour beans and says,
"A loss. Earwax."
Harry grins at Dumbledore before we cut to black to end sequence 2. Sequence 3 opens a couple of days later with Harry pleading with Madame Pomfrey to let Ron and Hermione into the hospital wing to visit him. She agrees, and Harry proceeds to tell Ron and Hermione everything that happened with Quirrell and the conversation with Dumbledore. Hagrid then arrives, guilt-ridden about the fact that he told Quirrell how to get past Fluffy, and this is when he will give the photo album to Harry
of his parents. This is obviously different to the movie, where he gives it to Harry as he is leaving Hogwarts. The following scene then plays out pretty much shot for shot what we saw in the movie, with Dumbledore awarding last-minute points to the trio and Neville, leading to Gryffindor winning the House Cup. Say what you will about the ridiculousness of this decision and the clear bias that Dumbledore shows, it's still an incredibly heartwarming moment. We then have a montage of the students in the common room packing up their things to go home, leaving Hogwarts and boarding the Hogwarts Express. We never got to see the return journey from Hogwarts in any of the movies, so it will be really nice to see this in the series. And during this journey, we'll see the trio discussing their exam results, playing games, and eating sweets. Finally, the Hogwarts Express arrives at King's Cross, and as they get off the train, people call out words of farewell to Harry, which is a really nice juxtaposition from how Harry felt when he arrived at King's Cross Station at the beginning of the series. Harry, Ron and Hermione walk through the barrier before seeing Mrs. Weasley, who warmly greets them, and Harry thanks her for the Christmas presents. Suddenly, Uncle Vernon appears with Aunt Petunia and a terrified Dudley in tow. Mrs. Weasley tries to greet them politely, but Uncle Vernon dismisses it and hurries Harry along. Before leaving, Harry shares a mischievous grin with Ron and Hermione. Since the Dursleys don't know he's not allowed to use magic, he plans on tormenting Dudley all summer. The camera zooms out as we see the four of them leaving the station. In the book, this is the end of the story. However, a good TV series always needs something to keep the audience eager to come back for the next season of the show. We cut to Hogwarts, now silent and empty after all of the students have left for their summer holidays. The camera moves slowly through the corridors of moving portraits and creaking suits of armor. We move close to the ground, almost snake-like, into a dirty bathroom. And as we enter, we hear a sinister whisper, almost like a snake speaking. Cut to black, and the credits roll on season 1, bringing it to a close and leaving us with a huge cliffhanger and clue for what Harry needs to face next year. And that wraps up my full breakdown for HBO's Harry Potter Season 1. Over the past 8 episodes, we've explored how each one will bring Harry's first journey to life, from the Dursleys' doorstep to the final showdown with Voldemort. I honestly think that if HBO follows even half of these ideas, we could be in for something truly magical. So what do you want to see in the show as a whole? Let me know in the comments, as well as your predictions for upcoming seasons. I'll be back next time to plan out my vision for HBO's Harry Potter Season 2.